Viewing figure discourse, especially around Doctor Who, is frustrating in like multiple ways because the majority of people who talk about it have absolutely no idea what any of the numbers mean. But what we're going to do in this incredibly sexy segment, we're going to look at this graph here from the BARB. We've got the viewing figures for the top 50 shows from the week that Doctor Who came back with its double premiere with Space Babies and The Devil's Chord, as well as the Eurovision Song Contest weekend. And the figures have been pretty surprising. Now, the Church on Ruby Road, the 7-day figures was around the 7 to 8 million range, and that was around similar for the 60th anniversary specials back in November, which caused the Star Beast to be the #1 most viewed drama of the week. The Church on Ruby Road, at least before the 7 days came in, was the #1 most viewed drama on Christmas Day, which was the first time that Doctor Who had ever had that in its entire 60-year history, which is quite an accomplishment. But the actual raw figures have been quite concerning for some Doctor Who fans, but we're going to break them down. So Space Babies ranked 10th in the charts this week with just over 4,008,000 people saw Doctor Who Space Babies in its first 7 days of release. And then just slightly further down the chart at number 12 we have Doctor Who with The Devil's Chord with 3.9 million there. You can see it's just a 2.5% drop from the first episode to the second episode, which was a double bill. This includes the iPlayer build-up, the 19 hours that Doctor Who was on the iPlayer before it dropped on broadcast linear TV, and also includes the 7-day viewing figures for the iPlayer and on catch-up and on demand after its release for the past 7 days. Now, when you focus on just the 4 million figure, this is obviously quite a concerning drop. Like I said, Church on Ruby Road was viewed by 7 or 8 million, and previous season openers have at least like gone around maybe like the 5 or 6 million range. So this is a pretty substantial slump. And what you need to consider here is that maybe the iPlayer release might have actually hurt Doctor Who's viewing figures, because we have Ratings UK, which have tabulated where the source of these viewing figures came from, and for Space Babies, only 300,000 people watched Doctor Who Space Babies in the 19 hours before it dropped on linear broadcast TV on BBC One that evening. 240,000 people watched The Devil's Chord before it went live on BBC One that evening. The vast majority of the people who viewed the episode viewed it during that BBC One viewing that evening on live linear TV, and then just over 1 million, and then 1.25 million. For more people viewed The Devil's Chord on iPlayer for the 7 days afterwards than they did Space Baby, surprisingly. When people were considering that the viewing figures would be like massively influenced by the BBC iPlayer rollout 19 hours before it drops on BBC One, the influence might actually have been in the negative range, because it seems like those 19 hours, hardly anybody watched it on the BBC iPlayer, and they just waited for it to turn up on TV, which is honestly quite concerning and quite surprising. Eurovision Song Contest was the #1 most viewed programme of that week with 7.8 million. This is also down 25% from the previous year. We also have Red Eye, which is a big ITV crime drama starring Richard Armitage that has been making waves over the past couple of weeks with 6.3 million. And then further down, after Britain's Got Talent, Race Across the World, Coronation Street, we've also got Blue Lights, specifically Series 2, Episode 5 of Blue Lights, which has been doing really well. It's in its second series, and the second series has done better than the first series. It's one of those few seasons that has picked up momentum as it's gone along. And then a bit further down, Coronation Street, Clarkson's Farm, and then Doctor Who. Now, the 2.5% dip from Space Babies to Devil's Chord indicates that Space Babies is maybe a better opener in terms of quality than we gave it credit for, in that 2.5% of people who watched Space Babies also watched Devil's Chord. So the drop between the first two episodes was minimal. That's a very, very impressive hold. But when I say impressive hold, it is from a lower audience. Now, when it comes to Red Eye, this #1 drama, let's say, we've talked about this before, the idea that Doctor Who being the #1 most viewed drama all the time ever is absolute fiction. It is very, very rarely the #1 most viewed drama of the week in like any time that it's been broadcast. It's only happened like a handful of times, like literally, I think you can only count it on one, maybe two hands now after the Star Beast, but it's very, very limited. But for Red Eye, this 6.3 million, let's call it our ceiling. Like, there was no way that Doctor Who was going to surpass Eurovision this week. For Red Eye, however, it's a little bit complicated because Red Eye had a ITVX, which is ITV streaming service. It rolled out there first, and then it's been broadcasting every week on ITV proper. And if you look at, once again, Ratings UK, Red Eye, with its viewing figures here, this is for one of the episodes during the week of the 29th of April to the 5th of May. So it's not this exact episode, but hopefully you understand the trend that I'm implying here. For Red Eye, it got over half of its audience from the streaming service over several weeks. Then 1.5 million people watched it on ITV, and then there's the small audience that watched it for the 7 days after it was broadcast on ITV, which means that this 6.3 million figure is actually this episode of Red Eye getting a month-long head start on ITV. So that skews this particular number. But still, Red Eye's doing well, Blue Lights is doing well as well, and Doctor Who was the most viewed programme on the BBC outside of Eurovision that particular Saturday, but it did fall behind its police drama, Blue Lights. Now, for this particular figure, 4 million, it is a lot lower than what you'd expect from a Doctor Who season opener, but we also have to consider it's still a top 10 show. I think that we need to consider the idea that this single number here, the actual total audience, is not the one and only barometer for success here, because like I said, if you discount Red Eye, which got roughly half of its audience in the weeks, and in this case, like full month, leading up to its actual broadcast, Blue Lights is more likely going to be the number one most viewed drama of the week, discounting soaps, so that's always a weird variable. But yeah, marginally slightly more than Doctor Who. I think what we have to acknowledge with this particular result, depending on how the upcoming weeks unfold in terms of viewing figures, that maybe the summer months are not a good time to release Doctor Who. I saw people who watched Boom live on broadcast at like 7 PM on BBC One, that it was really weird to watch it and the sun was still blaring outside. I think one reason maybe Jodie Whittaker's era got such high viewing figures, and also the 60th anniversary specials back in November, was because the days were shorter then. And I think the fact that the weather, and I think the fact that the weather has been so good over the past few weeks has played a factor in why the viewing figures are so relatively low for this particular week. Like I said, Eurovision, Britain's Got Talent, Race Along the World. Like, this isn't like Doctor Who is languishing down here with 4 million and everyone else is getting like 8 million, 9 million, 10 million, 12 million, etc., etc. There's clearly like another factor outside of that's dragging everything down, and I think a lot of it's got to do with the weather. Also, with Eurovision, there's the weird variable there as well, where an awful lot of people would have been boycotting Eurovision. Like I said, this audience figure is down 25% from the previous year. So maybe that similar demographic who would have watched Doctor Who that evening decided not to watch it because they just weren't watching TV at all that evening because they were boycotting Eurovision. Obviously, there's no way to prove that. We don't have the full ironclad data, but like, you have to like look at these sociological variables here when it comes to viewing figures. Now, when people are going to claim that Doctor Who is dead, Doctor Who is dying, with this figure of 4 million, once again, it's a top 10 show, and even though Devil's Court is 12, it only is like 12 by only a couple of like, by less than 100,000. Like losing out to Emmerdale here for the number 11 spot. There's absolutely no shame in this ranking. But also the audience percentage share for Space Babies was like around 25% as well. So that's still quite a decent figure. One thing you have to consider in terms of measuring Doctor Who's success is that take this 4 million figure for Space Babies. Another figure that got 4 million went like, because Ian Levine was posting on Twitter responding to these viewing figures saying, I never thought that Doctor Who would be in such a terrible, precarious state again. And he's presumably referring to like late 80s Doctor Who, when Doctor Who was cancelled, when it was getting audiences of 4 million. Ghostlight had an audience of around 4 million as well. Same audience size back in 1989, October 1989. Chat, guess what ranking for the week the first episode of Ghostlight was, with an audience size of 4 million people in 1989. Guess what ranking it was? And keep in mind that in 1989, there were like 3 channels, BBC One, ITV, BBC Two. Do you know, like Doctor Who, going up against Coronation Street, what ranking do you think Doctor Who had for the week it broadcast? Ghostlight Part 1. Throw out some figures, let's go for it. 15th? No lower? Less than 100th? 98th or thereabout. 96th. Ghostlight, with a similar audience size of 4 million in 1989, was ranked 96th for the week, whereas Doctor Who, with the same audience size, is a top 10 show. I think we need to acknowledge that this number itself can only tell us so much. Now, 4 million is still way below what I thought Ncuti Gatwa's first series of Doctor Who would get, particularly after that Christmas special and the 60th anniversary specials. I don't think word of mouth has impacted the show that much because A, the ones who are complaining about anti-woke SJW, non-binary like stuff, they weren't watching Doctor Who anyway. I genuinely think those people don't even have the capacity to even turn on their television sets if those are the talking points they're going with. They're not watching Doctor Who anyway. But also, the positive the series has got a really positive reception. Critics really like it. I'm seeing people on my Facebook feed, my personal Facebook feed, who have never talked about Doctor Who before, saying how much they're really, really enjoying it. Like, you know, it's getting really positive, like, general broad reception. I've hardly seen any, like, reactionary backlash to the latest run of Doctor Who, because presumably it's giving them so little ammunition. I don't think that, like, you know, they're turning against Doctor Who, they're turning against the woke I genuinely don't think that is playing, like, maybe it's playing like a factor, but maybe a very, very marginal factor. The Star Beast got 7-day figures of 7.6 million. So I will say that even though the audience share and the ranking and everything is absolutely fine, this number dropping 3.5 million from the Star Beast, that in and of itself is quite concerning. I will say I do think that maybe the show being pushed so heavily on the iPlayer is now giving audiences the perception that it's not like an urgent show, that it's not something that they need to sit down on a Saturday night to watch. It's something that will just be on the iPlayer for them whenever they want to watch it. It will be interesting to see how the viewing figures pan out over the next few weeks and months for the rest of the series, because if it like stays at like 4 million and 3.5 million, that's actually pretty freaking good to be able to like keep an audience and maintain that audience over 7 weeks of TV. That's like genuinely impressive, even if this starting gate number isn't as high as we'd expect it to be. We'll obviously have to see how the trends play out, and also the 28-day viewing figure will be really interesting as well. Like, for example, Ncuti Gatwa in Sex Education, I didn't start watching Sex Education until it had already been out for 3 years, but I'm still technically part of its audience. I just got to it 3 years later. There's the advent of streaming and like binge models and everything and on-demand viewing where things just aren't that urgent anymore, and I think that that is the audience that Doctor Who might be trying to court there. Now, when it comes to the actual marketing for the show, it's genuinely been a meme for like the past 6 months, just how much marketing Russell T Davies, Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson have been doing, especially when compared to the Chibnall era, where they were, you know, we might tweet, you know, we might possibly have John Bishop on BBC Breakfast, but you can't say a single thing about the show. It was basically a meme that Russell T Davies, David Tennant, Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson were doing such a massive marketing push. And then when these 7-day figures came out, people were like, oh, they've hardly done any marketing. The marketing's been non-existent. Like, the weird selective memory is so baffling to me, because it's from the same people who were like, oh, their marketing. It's like, I genuinely think in terms of marketing, Bad Wolf and the BBC and the creatives could literally not have done any more. Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson were on basically almost every single magazine cover for the past couple of months. They did radio, they did The One Show, they did Russell T Davies did BBC Breakfast. They did the blue carpet premiere in the UK. They honestly could not have done any more. So, you know, you can't really fault them for trying with the marketing. And I thought with that marketing, we would have got an audience of at least maybe 6 million, maybe 5.5 million. But clearly with Red Eye getting 6.3 million, despite having a month head start, that number was clearly out of the question for this particular week. I think the weather might have also played a big factor in that as well. And people are saying, oh, the weather, like, oh, well, what will they think of next in order to excuse woke Doctor Who failure? Like, honestly, if you think that, then it's kind of like it's instantly disqualifying for you to be part of the conversation, because obviously the weather and other trends that are happening nationwide are going to have an impact on viewing. Are you insane? Like, we even know this for Doctor Who. The Satan Pit in Series 2 in 2006 got like the lowest viewing figures of that particular series because the weather was so bloody good that weekend, and also the rugby, I think. But the weather, like, we've known that Doctor Who can be impacted by the summer weather. Like, we've known this for approaching 20 years. Why do they say that about the weather? Because if it's lovely outside in a country that's normally quite grey and miserable outside of the summer months, you go outside and take advantage of it. I think looking forward, if I was a BBC analyst looking at these figures, I'd be happy that Doctor Who is a top 10 show, and that it's just like a hair's breadth away from the nearest drama competitor, Blue Lights, by just under 200,000. But I would strongly suggest now that the next series broadcast during the winter or autumn months. For example, maybe you go straight from Church on Ruby Road to Space Babies a week later, or you do it in like October, November time when the days are shorter. That's kind of the trend that I'm seeing with these numbers. But all of this is moot because Doctor Who is not just being shown on the BBC and the BBC iPlayer now, it's being shown on Disney Plus internationally. And while we don't have the actual specific numbers, because Disney Plus is under no obligation to release those, unlike in the UK when we have organisations like the BARB, we have got some like tracking websites which have charted Doctor Who over the past 2 weekends consistently in the top 5 TV programmes. Even in countries like Brazil, where it peaked, Doctor Who Boom, as in the 3rd episode, peaked at number 3 on Disney Plus in Brazil. Brazil! Doctor Who was the 3rd most watched Disney Plus show in Brazil, the Stephen Moffat Doctor Who episode. That's insane to me. And, it kind of shows that BBC is not booming in Brazil. Absolutely. So I think with this, summer is now no longer peak Doctor Who territory like it was during Russ T Davies's original run. I think that it now has to be done during the winter months. It's all for moot anyway because we've got Disney Plus and we don't know what those viewing figures are, but like I said, it's charting consistently high on the weekends that it drops. It's in the top 5 shows in America. It was like top 3 in Brazil. It's doing well. How about Australia? I'm not sure, actually. One second. Disney Plus ranking Australia on 21st of May. Oh, nice. Top 10 over. Yeah, it's at number 4. As in like today, as in the Monday. It's already been out for a couple of days in Australia, and it's still number 4. So yeah, that's kind of mad. In the UK, in its home country, during the week it came out, it's a top 10 show. But internationally, in Brazil, it's like top 3. In Australia, it's top 4. That's really impressive. Perhaps this is the kind of show that works better in the winter season. Yeah, I think they went for this release window. I know that Russ T Davies did an interview with Doctor Who magazine a few months ago saying that the original plan was for Space Babies to almost immediately follow Church on Ruby Road. But they had to wait for some of the visual effects to be finalised, which is absolutely fine. But I think now, for Series 15 moving forward, I think that they broadcast it around September, October, November time, or in January. I think that's maybe where Doctor Who, as a slightly scary family TV show, can really thrive. Here in Canada it's number 9. Awesome, nice. Doctor Who is top 9 in Greece. Cool. So yeah, obviously we don't have the actual figures on their own. Australia, yesterday. Oh, God's sake, I need a premium account. Doctor Who in 1989, with this exact same audience number, was like skirting like the top 100. Now it's in the top 10. That just kind of shows that this number on its own as a metric for success is completely moot. It has to be compared and contrasted with all the other variables like ranking, like percentage share, and all these other factors, like the 28-day viewing figures as well, because, we've seen this with shows like Luther, like Peter Kay's Car Share, like Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, and even Red Eye as well, dropping all of the episodes on ITV. That having a show there that's bingeable once all the episodes have dropped, or multiple episodes have dropped, and then people who maybe, I want to watch that Doctor Who, but we don't have to watch it right now. We'll watch it in a couple of weeks' time and binge a load of episodes when the weather's really bad. We can do that, and then we'll see how that pans out. For example, Starbeast. What was the overnights for Starbeast? Sorry, overnights for Starbeast. The overnights for Starbeast were 5.08 million on BBC One, and then 28 days later, it got over 9 million. It nearly doubled its audience with the 28-day viewing figures. So, I have to see how that pans out. But yeah, obviously, this number itself, 4 million, is lower than I expected it to be, and I think it's lower than most fans expected it to be. But Doctor Who, as we've seen from the BBC Studios, the commercial arm of the BBC, its financial reports every year, Doctor Who is routinely its most cited show for why it's been having profitable, unprofitable years, like year on year for the past couple of years. They've lost Top Gear, which was one of the other shows that they cited as well. We don't have to worry about cancellation anytime soon for Doctor Who. The next series is practically in the can. This is still a top 10 show for the BBC, even in a time when we've got the Eurovision Song Contest and Britain's Got Talent, and which kind of like bumps it down a little bit as well. But yeah, and it's also one of the most profitable shows generally in terms of licenses and merchandising and stuff like that. We don't have to worry at all about cancellation, but I do think that we do need to reconsider what constitutes a successful drama now. Because even if Doctor Who had like gotten Church on Ruby Road figures, for example, it would have like nearly bested Eurovision for that week. And nobody was reasonably expecting that to happen at all. Like, no one was reasonably expecting that to happen. So we have to adjust those expectations, at least when it comes to this particular number. Can we get any indication of Disney Plus figures? We really can't. Disney have the figures and they're under no obligation to release them. Lisa Mazimba, last night's Doctor Who episode Boom was watched by 2.04 million people according to the BARB overnights. These won't include people who watched early on iPlayer, so the overnights are much less significant than the consolidated figures, which include those numbers plus catch up. So yeah, if we go from a similar trajectory to what Devil's Cord had, and Space Babies, maybe good word of mouth will bump it up, but we're looking at maybe, if it's a similar trajectory, we could be looking at maybe a 7-day audience figure of maybe like 3.5, 3.6, but we'll see. Do you know how it ranked for the night for Boom? Oh yeah, I think wasn't it like the #1 most watched program on BBC One? Britain's Got Talent won the night with 4.10 million. Then 1% Club with 3.58 million, then Late ITV News with 2.21 million. Doctor Who was the 4th most watched of the day, most watched for the BBC. So that's interesting, yeah. So Doctor Who Boom was the most watched programme in terms of overnight viewing figures on BBC that day, on their Saturday. Like, on a Saturday, that's actually a pretty big deal. Yeah, the BBC, even if this number is lower than they probably would have liked it or expected it to be, the BBC aren't going to say, oh, this is our #1 show. Oh yeah, let's cancel it. Yeah. I watched all of the top 4, you bloody populist.